Yo. Welcome back to Son of a Preacher Man. As always, Soapman is in the house. Okay, so in my last few episodes, I've been talking a lot about the Big Bang Theory. And what I've basically been saying is that the modern day Big Bang Theory is the exact same story told in the beginning of Genesis. I also told you that the creation story, both modern and the one told in the Bible, began with the black hole. As a matter of fact, all the ancient creation stories and the modern day Big Bang Theory started with the black hole. I told you that when the Bible says there was darkness on the face of the deep, that it's talking about the singularity of a black hole. And when the Bible talks about the Spirit of the Lord moving on the face of the waters, it's talking about the accretion disk of a black hole. Now, I know all that may be new to you, the viewer, and you can go back through my past episodes and see how I came to that conclusion. For all intents and purposes, God goes on to subsequently create all the components of the universe, including our sun and solar system. So we come to a point in the creation story where Earth is created and life upon Earth has begun to spring up as far as plants and insects and animals. And the good thing about this part of the creation story is a lot of it's verifiable. Scientific evidence can pretty much prove a lot of what the Bible says as far as the creation of life on Earth. Okay, so we've all heard the story of Adam and Eve, right? Okay, so I'm just going to assume that we've all heard the story of Adam and Eve, or at least you've heard of the story of Adam and Eve. Okay, so straight up, if you haven't heard this story, you have been literally living under a rock. Anyway, I'm not going to retell this story because I don't think you want to hear it. I don't think you want to hear, and I don't want to tell a story that you've heard. This story is hard to tell anyway, and here's why. I was telling my son about this story. My son, Lex. Shout out to my son, Lex. His name's Langston. We call him Lex for short. So I was telling my son this story because I asked him if he had been reading his Bible. He was like, yeah. And I was like, well, what you been reading? He was like, I've been reading about the creation story. And I said, have you gotten to Adam and Eve yet? And he was like, no. I said, oh, then never mind. So he says, why? Who were they? What did they do? And I kind of hesitated. And I told him, it's stories and it's what really happened. And so you see, to me, that's the problem with this story. It's the story of Adam and Eve, and then there's what really happened. So I told my son this story with the caveat being, look, it's just a story. Because I know I'm going to get to a part where snakes start talking and other fantastical stuff that I know did not literally happen. People don't understand that this is not a biography of Adam and Eve. This is a myth or a legend of Adam and Eve. And I'll dig more into that in a moment. So I tell my son this story, and then I find myself stumbling to get over these parts. You know what I'm saying? These fantasy parts like the talking snake. And I try to, just summarize the story to get through it. But I was telling him, I was going to do this episode on my YouTube channel where we take a look at what real evidence we have of Adam and Eve. One of the biggest problems with this story is that people want to take this story literally. People of faith, people who believe in the Bible, they want to take this story literally, talking snakes and all. People of faith are afraid to not take this story literally. They feel that if they do not believe the accounts of Adam and Eve and take them literally, that it somehow diminishes their faith, their holiness, or their relationship with God. And so it presents a real problem when you're trying to have a real factual conversation about a story in which a lot of it is probably true. So really quick, another one of the myths and legends, and it's the reason I got this slide up. I want to explain this slide really quick. Another one of the myths and legends about Adam and Eve is that they were the first man and woman on earth. And in this episode, I'm going to attempt to try to prove that they were not the first man and woman on earth. In fact, let me attempt to do it right now. We have plenty of evidence of man and the evolution of man dating back for hundreds of thousands of years. And if you correctly date the story of Adam and Eve, it only dates back to about 10,000 years. That should be the end of that. I tell you what, I want to make a challenge, a deal, a bet with the church folks. Let's go back as far as we can go back concerning this story. And let's proceed forward. And let's let the facts fall as they may. And let's promise right now to accept those facts. Let's promise to accept the evidence and follow it in whatever direction it leads. And if not, let me know where you disagree with the facts and evidence. So, the story of Adam and Eve that we get comes from Moses, the great prophet who came out of Egypt. The Bible talks about the creation of the universe, and I talked about that in my last few episodes. But I have this slide up because I want you to notice the last line, and it reads, "And the evening and the morning were the first day." Okay, now, don't fall into the trap that so many dummies fall into, and that is thinking the Bible is talking about a 24-hour day, because that would be ridiculous. You big dummy. So, folks, we talked about the Big Bang Theory, and I told you it was the exact same story told by Moses in the Bible. And according to the modern day Big Bang Theory, the universe is approximately 13.8 billion years old. So if you want to understand how long the Bible is talking about when it says a day, all you really need to do is divide. To make it easy, let's round 13.8 to just 14 billion, a nice pretty even number. The Bible says it took 7 days to create the universe, and the seventh day he rested. Divide 14 by 7 and you get 2. So you looking at roughly 2 billion years equals a day that God's talking about. Okay? And here's the thing. Why would God's day equal one of your days? Why would you assume that when God says a day, that he's talking about one of your days? So, folks, we have another instance where the Bible says something, people take it literally or assume that they know what it's talking about. And whoosh, they're whisked off into the realm of fantasy, like Alice falling down a rabbit hole into one. The Bible says God created the heaven in day 2. And so what that means is it took just shy of 2 billion years in order for that to take place. Now, I know a lot of you would like to think he just poofed the heavens into existence, but this should give you a greater appreciation and understanding of exactly who God is and what he does and how he does it. Here's the thing. If that's not proof enough for you, consider this. Genesis chapter 1, 9 through 13, at the 13th verse, it says, "And the evening and the morning were the 3rd day." Now, why is that important? The last line here says, "And the evening and the morning were the 3rd day." Why is that important? Well, as you see here, I have Earth in big bold print. This was the day that Earth was created. Earth wasn't created until the 3rd day. A day is called a day because it takes 24 hours for the Earth to make a complete rotation on its axis. That's where we get a day from. Okay? So we can't have a day without Earth. The Bible is talking about days before the Earth was created. So how can you say that he did what he did on day 1 or did what he did on day 2 and be talking about a 24-hour day when the Earth will not be created until day 3? By that logic, day 1 and 2 must not be 24-hour days. So you see how confusing these things can get right off the bat. And I know some of you are shaking your heads and rolling your eyes because you know better, but you'd be surprised how many people don't. I'm just saying all this to show facts matter. And the more information you have, the better understanding and appreciation you'll have about reality. Okay, so day 6 of the creation story, God makes man. And he does it in a miraculous way. The Bible said he makes him from the dust of the earth. And here's my question to you. What do you think that means? Do you think when the Bible says that means a man came down and waved his hand over some dirt and a living being popped up out of the ground? So, anyway, as the story goes, God creates Adam from the dust of the earth. He sees that Adam is lonely, and so he puts Adam into this coma-like sleep, takes one of his ribs and creates his wife Eve. Bone of his bone, flesh of his flesh. Now here's the thing. We know for a fact that a lot of dynasties of rulers from the Middle East to Egypt and beyond had this practice of keeping their bloodline pure by marrying their close relatives like their sisters. And I think this all stems from the Adam and Eve story, legend, whatever you want to call it. We'll get back to this. Let's just stick to the story and just progress from there. So there's this Garden of Eden, and it's like the final component to this story. And it's supposed to be a literal heaven on earth. Adam and Eve are in this garden. First thing I want you to be aware of and take note is that God says is the Bible says God places Adam in the Garden of Eden, which would mean he is not native to the Garden of Eden, okay? Just a little side note. So anyway, this garden is supposed to be unbelievable. It's it got fruits that bear every fruit, every kind of plant. It talks of animals. Adam names all the animals of the earth. And so this is true paradise. So the story of Adam and Eve ends with them getting kicked out. And so you say to yourself, how did they ruin this? How did they lose the bag? How did they drop the ball? And it all has to do with a tree that was in the midst of the Garden of Eden. It was a couple of trees, actually. One tree was the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the other tree was the tree of life. I think I got that right. So anyway, Adam and Eve, they could indulge in anything in the garden that they wanted to. Nothing was restricted of them except for these two trees. Man, they was not even supposed to touch these two trees. But the serpent convinced Eve into eating off one of the trees. I forget which one. And the serpent deceived Eve, and Eve subsequently deceived Adam. Anywho, this story ends with Adam and Eve getting exiled out of the Garden of Eden. The serpent deceived them, caused them to commit the first sin ever. Another myth and legend. This is the first time anything bad had ever happened on earth. Do you really believe that? I mean, come on. Look, when you're thinking about these stories, do you want to know the truth? Or do you want to just believe whatever helps you sleep better at night? It's not that hard to understand if you understand that this is a myth, this is a legend, this is not a biography of Adam and Eve. This was an oral story passed down for thousands of years, and it was meant to be remembered. It was meant for the characters in the story to be remembered because they were legendary people, but it is not an accurate biographical, documented history of Adam and Eve. So Adam and Eve, the story of Adam and Eve ends with them being exiled, kicked out of the Garden of Eden. So I want to ask you, how do you think that happened? Do you think somebody came down and told them to leave? Do you think God said, hey, you got to go? Do you think a voice came out of the clouds and they just left them and all their descendants? So, as I said before, this is not a biography of Adam and Eve. This was a myth and a legend. Think about this. The story of Adam and Eve happened. Okay, something happened. There was a reason for somebody telling this story. Whatever happened, something happened, and somebody told this story. But when they told it orally because people weren't writing as far back as Adam and Eve. What you got to understand is how long ago this happened. So very long ago that people wouldn't be writing for thousands of years, long after Adam and Eve were dead and gone. And for those people who feel like they have to take everything the Bible says literally, that the Bible is the gospel truth from cover to cover, don't feel bad. It is. It still is. The fact that all of the story of Adam and Eve is not true, the fact that some parts of it are not true, does not take away from does not challenge the veracity of the Bible as a whole. Here's why. The story of Adam and Eve that we received from Moses, it was never meant to be an accurate account. It was an oral story, and it was believed to be true. It was what the people who had it had. That was what they had at the time. The story from its inception, if that's all you got, that is your truth. So the story, it's just because the story has some fantasy, cartoonish aspects to it, that was the truth that the people had at and during their time. No different than the truth that we have during our time. Somebody later may come back and laugh at it like those silly people. Look at what those silly people believe. But the story is authentic. It is the authentic legend of Adam and Eve passed down for thousands of years. That is what we have. It's 100% true in what it's meant to be. A myth and legend to remember Adam and Eve. So, folks, we gonna end it right here. And in my next episode, we gonna start with real evidence of the story of Adam and Eve. The Bible gives us a lot of clues and a lot of information, so it's nothing but to dig into it and to see how much of it is true and how much of it isn't true. Hell, maybe we'll find a talking snake. Anywho, I want to thank you for joining me for this episode of Son of a Preacher Man. If you got any comments, likes, or dislikes, leave them in the comment section. You want to mix it up with the Soapman, go toe-to-toe, holla at me in the comment section. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, notification bell. We out.